The recent overthrow of Bashar al-Assad's regime has dramatically reshaped the Middle East, disrupting established power structures and opening avenues for regional players to assert influence.
According to Turkish officials' own statements, they never expected the offensive to be this successful. They thought that Assad's military was going to put up a fight, and it didn't.
Turkey, having backed rebel factions prior to Assad's fall and currently hosting millions of Syrian refugees, stands at a pivotal crossroads. President Erdogan now faces a transformed landscape, presenting both challenges and opportunities for Turkey's strategic ambitions.
Obviously, now Turkey is very happy that Assad is gone. And Assad is toppled by a group that is friendly to Erdogan.
But what is Erdogan's endgame? How has Assad's fall reshaped Turkey's ambitions? And what does it mean for Turkey's ties with the US, Russia, and the region?
Turkey is not the Turkey of 2011 with so many resources. Erdogan has to share the limelight with others, and he's being very cautious.
This is Global Insights by Network 2020. Today, we delve into Turkey's evolving role in a post-Assad Middle East. Today, we're joined by Dr. Gunal Tol, the director of the Middle East Institute's Turkey program, senior fellow at the Black Sea program, and author of Erdogan's War, A Strongman's Struggle at Home and in Syria. Moderating the conversation is Courtney Doggart, president of Network 2020.
So Dr. Tol, I would love to start where I typically start, which is a little bit of scene setting. And so I'd love if you wouldn't mind just laying out for us what relations have been like between Turkey and Syria over the past few decades. So I realize that's a big question, and you could easily spend an entire semester on it. But if you wouldn't mind hitting the highlights that you think are relevant to the conversation for today.
Well, of course. Well, first of all, let me thank you so much for inviting me. I think you asked the perfect question because I live in DC, and when I engage policymakers and other analysts, people only look at what's happening today. And without really understanding the background of Turkish, especially Turkish-Syrian relationship, it's difficult to understand the role Syria plays in Turkish domestic politics. So Syria has always played a very important role in Turkey's domestic affairs, even before Erdogan came to power in 2002. So in the 1980s, 1990s, Syria hosted the leader of the PKK. The PKK is the Kurdish separatist organization that is considered to be a terrorist group by Turkey and the United States. So Syria hosted the leader who is now in jail in Turkey. His name is Abdullah Öcalan. There were always problems between Syria and Turkey, mainly water sharing issues, and they had the security concerns vis-a-vis each other. And Syria hosted the PKK leader for many years to be able to use him as a trump card against Turkey. So because of the PKK's presence in Syria, Turkish military justified its oversized role in politics using the PKK influence in Syria. So before Erdogan came to power, Turkish generals who were the self-appointed guardians of the country's secularism, they always made the argument that we have to play the dominant role in policymaking, not only in domestic politics, but also in foreign policy, mainly because we are surrounded by enemies like Syria who are there, who are waiting and who are using terrorism as a trump card against us. So that was also the case when Erdogan won the elections in 2002. So Syria in particular, for the secularist Turkish military's point of view, it had two red lines when it came to the Middle East. One was the generals were always concerned that regional countries were going to use the PKK against Turkey. So Kurdish separatism was a huge red line for them. And the second red line was the prospect of Iran basically exporting its Islamist ideology to Turkey. So in the 1990s, we actually had an Islamist government briefly. And one of the reasons why the military brought him down was because he cultivated very close ties with Islamic countries. And the military thought that that was going to undermine Turkish state's secular nature. So this is the background against which Erdogan came to power. And he had learned a lesson by 2002, when he launched his own political party. He said that I'm not an Islamist anymore. And my party, he defined his party as a conservative democratic party. So that was his domestic image. But for many of us who had known him for many decades as an Islamist politician and who would never consider voting for an Islamist-rooted politician, it was hard to really believe what he was telling us, that he was not an Islamist anymore, and his main priority was to consolidate Turkish democracy. So he used foreign policy to convince people like me. When he came to power, he managed to appeal to a much larger constituency, not just the Islamists, but liberals like myself. And there were Turks, Kurds, nationalists, conservatives, secularists. So he had this really wide coalition, ideologically wide coalition. And the reason why he was able to form that wide coalition was mainly foreign policy. So he said that his number one goal was to get Turkey into the European Union. And that really burnished his democratic credentials. And when it came to the Middle East, he did not want to provoke the military. And that's why he tried his best to respect the military's red lines. And in Syria, that meant cultivating relations in a very cautious way, but also underline the fact that he had secured Syrians' cooperation against the PKK. So that's why when he, from 2002 to 2011, he formed this very close partnership with the Assad regime. And when the secularists had doubts about his intentions, he said, I'm only cultivating these close ties with Syria because Syria is a great market for our goods. That's number one. And the second thing, that Assad has reiterated his support. He had handed over Abdullah Öcalan to Turkey, and he's a great partner in our fight against the PKK. So those talking points calmed people down and made people believe that he was actually not an Islamist politician anymore. So Syria served that purpose. So from 2002 to 2011, Erdogan's number one domestic goal was to sideline the secularists, particularly the military. And again, by normalizing relations with Syria, Erdogan managed to sideline the military, curb military's influence in politics. And by seeking Turkey's membership for the EU, he also managed to do that because EU membership required carrying out reforms that would curb the military's influence. So again, Syria played a role that really helped Erdogan to sideline his opponents at home. So from 2011 onwards, he had already achieved his goal of sidelining the secularists. By 2011, he had already had full control over the military, over bureaucracy, over media, over the business elite. So he had already consolidated power, and he had set his eyes on a new goal, and that was securing unchecked powers. And he was going to do that through switching the country's parliamentary system to an all-powerful presidential system. And again, at home, he realized that he was not going to do that with the wide ideological coalition that he had formed before, because by that time, people like me had abandoned him, because we had realized that he was not the leader who was going to consolidate Turkish democracy. Instead, he was he was trying to establish a one-man rule. So he realized that he had to rely on two constituencies at home. One, the Islamists and conservatives, and the second constituency was the Kurds. So he realized in order to appeal to these constituencies, he needed to embark on an Islamization agenda at home. That meant, I'm not talking about trying to establish a Sharia-like state like Iran, but injecting more Islam into public sphere, into education, into Turkish bureaucracy, lifting the ban on the headscarf, which was a red line for the secularists. So by doing that, he was planning to appeal to the Islamists and the conservatives. And the second thing he did was to launch a Kurdish opening to secure Kurdish backing for his presidential dreams. And the Arab uprisings began at the perfect time for Erdogan, because at home from 2011 onwards, he had started defining himself as the protector of the Muslims across the world. Ghan was the man who defined himself as the conservative Democrat. Now he had redefined himself and his party as the protector of the Muslim nation, Ummah. So when the Arab uprising started, he used the uprisings to extend his domestic Islamist agenda beyond Turkey's borders, because this is how he framed the Arab uprisings. He said, Arabs are doing what Turks did in 2002. They are trying to topple the quote-unquote godless secularist elites. So they are getting rid of their own godless elites. So that's how he framed it, and that really that really managed to appeal a large constituency at home. So if you look at the public opinion polls in 2011, 2012, for example, a majority of the country, 60-65% of the country, really saw him as the protector of the Muslims and as a liberator, as a Muslim hero. That's how people, even his opponents, saw him that way. So the conflict in Syria, when it started in 2011, Turkey immediately, and remember the Syrian uprising, they started as peaceful protests, right? 1 month after those protests started, Turkey started arming the anti-Assad opposition. Turkey sent weapons to Islamist groups and later jihadi groups. So Erdogan's ideological agenda at home, Islamist agenda at home, translated into a pro-Islamist Syria policy, where Erdogan threw his support behind Muslim Brotherhood, behind those Islamist groups that were trying to topple the Assad regime. But by 2015, and in the meantime, he had launched this Kurdish opening in an effort to grant more rights to the Kurds, and the main goal was to secure Kurdish support. But something happened in 2014, and that was, do you remember a town called Kobani that is in northern Syria? And remember, ISIS was about to capture Kobani, right? And President Obama was very nervous because he had all eyes were on Kobani. And President Obama realized if he allowed Kobani to fall, if he allowed ISIS to capture Kobani, that would be, first, that would be a failure for America's Syria policy, but it would also be a huge win for ISIS. So he did not want that to happen. And to counter that, he asked for Erdogan's help. And he said, we're going to put together a global coalition against ISIS. We want to use the NATO base in Turkey, in southern Turkey. That was the number one thing that Obama asked. And he said, and also I want you to open your border so that the Iraqi Kurds can use Turkish territory to go into Syria. So they can help the Syrian Kurds there, because Kobani is a Kurdish town, and at the time, Syrian Kurds were defending it. So Erdogan rejected these two demands. And in protest, Turkey's Kurds took to the streets in hundreds of thousands. They were protesting Erdogan's inaction because they thought that Erdogan saw the Kurds as a bigger enemy than a brutal terrorist organization like ISIS. And as a result, Obama, realizing that he was not gonna get any help from Erdogan, he airdropped weapons to the Syrian Kurdish militia, which Turkey considers, again, linked to the PKK. He airdropped weapons. So that became a turning point, both in Turkish domestic politics and also in Turkish-American relations, because that moment really boosted the anxieties of Turkish nationalists. Many people thought that Americans are about to establish a Kurdish state on our border that is linked to an organization that's been waging a war against Turkey since 1980s. So that really boosted Turkish nationalism at home, and Erdogan decided to ride that nationalism. So that was when he saw the Kurds protesting on the streets against him, he realized that Kurds were never going to back his presidential dreams. And it became apparent in 2015 June elections when his party for the first time lost the parliamentary majority, thanks to the pro-Kurdish party capturing a historic 13%. So that's when he realized that this alliance with the Islamists and the Kurds was not going to deliver him the presidency. And he switched his strategy. He turned to Turkish nationalists. He abandoned the Kurdish opening, and by allying himself with the Turkish nationalists, he embarked on a very anti-Kurdish agenda at home. He immediately jailed the leader of democratically elected pro-Kurdish party's leaders. He clamped down on Kurdish NGOs. He closed down Kurdish schools. And in Syria, that translated into a very anti-Kurdish policy as well. So from 2015 onwards, Erdogan's number one goal in Syria was not toppling, quote unquote, the godless Assad regime anymore. His number one priority was curbing the Kurdish influence there, because that was necessary for his nationalist partners at home. And thanks to that alliance with the nationalists, and thanks to everything Erdogan did in Syria, and that included 5 military incursions into Syria, Erdogan managed to get enough votes to switch to a presidential system, an all-powerful presidency without any meaningful checks and balances. So he got what he wanted. Another turning point came in 2019. 2019 was when he lost local municipal elections, and that was a big deal for his party, because those big municipalities like Istanbul, Ankara, they really were the source of revenues that really helped him feed his clientelistic network. So losing those cities, he didn't take it well. And he realized there were 2 reasons why he lost the elections. Number one was the state of Turkish economy. And the number 2 reason was there were 4 million Syrian refugees in the country, and there was a growing nationalist backlash against them. So what happens? He realized that he needs to address the refugee question. So once again, for the 3rd time, he recalibrates his Syria policy. After having armed the anti-Assad opposition for many, many years, for the first time, he started talking about mending ties with the Assad regime, because he realized that only by shaking hands with Assad, he could be able to send the Syrian refugees back home and secure his support. So to sum up, when we talk about Syria has never been a foreign policy matter for Turkey. It's always had a very strong domestic component. So that's why If you want to understand what Erdogan is doing or wants to do in Syria today, you have to understand what his domestic calculations are to remain in power. I'm sorry if that was too long.
It was a big question, and you gave a terrific answer. And thank you. And I wanted to mention too, as someone who, briefly lived in Turkey, but had the experience as an outsider, I think two things that Dr. Toll touched on that were very resonant and very apparent at the time. And of course, this was 2 decades ago, but I think some of these themes remain the same, or at least one of them does, was one, the role of the military and the way, and I think it's hard for someone who is not in that system to understand the way in which the military very carefully guarded that role of stepping in and stepping out, and how with EU accession dreams and Erdogan's rise to power, how that disappeared. And so I think that that's a really, really important piece. And then the other that obviously you talked about is the role that the Kurdish question plays in the larger society. And so I think that that's all very apparent. So thank you very much for giving us that wonderful tour. So flash forward to today. December, Assad is ousted. There's now within Syria, I wouldn't say a complete power vacuum, but things are taking shape slowly. And obviously there's a lot of adjustment that needs to be made. And so where do you see Erdogan taking this, given the intense relationship that Syria isn't, as you said, that Syria isn't strictly foreign policy, but it's also very much domestic policy. Where do you see Erdogan taking this at this particular point?
Before answering that, let me tell you this, so you understand the role Turkey has been playing in Syria. There are right now, these are not the official numbers. The official number is 18,000, but there are 30,000 Turkish troops stationed in Syria, in northern Syria. So Turkey controls a large chunk of Syrian territory. This was after Turkey reached an understanding with Assad and with Russia, that he launched his incursion against the Kurds in Syria. And Russia allowed him to do, because if you remember, Russia had intervened in Syria militarily in 2015. So Russia controlled the skies. Russia controlled everything on the ground. So Turkey had to secure a green light from Putin to be able to launch those military incursions, and he did. So this was the quid pro quo. He said, I'm going to go in because I need these military incursions to keep my nationalist coalition intact. I'm going to go in, and in return, I will ask the opposition that I have supported to withdraw from key places like Aleppo. So in 2016, Aleppo fell to the Assad regime before the opposition groups controlled Aleppo. And that happened, and it was considered to be a turning point in the Syrian civil war. Many people at that point in 2016, now we understand it was short-sighted, but many people, the consensus was that Assad had won the war. And that happened thanks to Turkey convincing the groups that it had supported. So that was the quid pro quo. Erdogan was going to kill the Kurds in the north, and Assad was going to look the other way, and Erdogan was going to deliver Assad the Syrian opposition. So, and right now there are again almost 30,000 Turkish troops, and it's not just a military invasion. Turkey is engaged in a mini nation state building there. So Turkey has built hospitals, post offices. Those territories controlled by Turkey are run by governors from Turkey's border towns. Turkey provides electricity, Turkey provides water. In some places like Idlib, for example, they use Turkish currency. And the supermarkets, they are filled with Turkish products. Turkey sent teachers there, so the education language, they provide education in Turkish. They teach them Turkish. And if you paid attention, after Assad's toppling, now there's a new cabinet, and half of them speak Turkish, half of them have Turkish citizenship. So that's the kind of role Turkey has played in Syria. Now, what role did it play in toppling of the Assad regime? As I said, for a long time, Turkey had given up its desire to topple the regime, actually. It was fine with Assad as long as Assad shook hands with Erdogan and agreed to the return of Syrian refugees from Turkey back into Syria. But Assad was reluctant to do that. Erdogan called on him several times. He said that he wanted to normalize ties, and Assad really thought that Erdogan was desperate. Erdogan was losing ground at home, and he was desperate to send those refugees back to Syria. So he wanted to Assad wanted to extract concessions. So before shaking hands, he said, you have to withdraw from Syrian territory for me to normalize ties. So as he dragged his feet, the group that toppled the regime in December, they wanted to launch that offensive in October. And Erdogan put the brakes on that, because for the last time, he wanted to see whether Assad was going to finally agree to normalizing ties. There was going to be a summit early November. So Erdogan wanted to see what Assad was going to say. So he asked the opposition, the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is now the new rulers of Syria, HTS, just wait. And they did. But after the summit on November 1st, when Assad once again gave Erdogan the cold shoulder, Erdogan went back and told the group to go ahead with the offensive. So they first captured Aleppo. But according to Turkish officials' own statements, they never expected the offensive to be this successful. They thought that the military, Syrian military, Assad's military was going to put up a fight, and it didn't. So things moved too fast on the ground, which came as a shock to people in Ankara too, to Turkish government. So they immediately, after they captured Aleppo in a matter of few hours, they moved on to Damascus, and before you knew, the regime was gone. So this came as a surprise. So what does that mean now? Obviously, now Turkey is very happy that Assad is gone. And Assad is toppled by a group that is friendly to Erdogan. Now, it doesn't mean that Turkey has full control over the new rulers in Damascus. The first foreign visit by Ahmed al-Shara, who is now the new president of Syria, he's going to go to Saudi Arabia. And that is surprising. Many people expected it to be Turkey. Now, that tells you something very important, and that is Turkey is not the Turkey of 2011 with so many resources. Right now, Turkish economy is in a terrible state. The Syria is a country in ruins. According to UN, it needs $500 billion to rebuild the entire country. Turkey does not have that kind of money. That's number one. Where will that money come from? Mostly from Saudi Arabia and other wealthy Gulf countries. So that's why Erdogan has to share the limelight with others, and he's being very cautious. So moving forward, there are two immediate things that Erdogan wants from the new government in Syria. Number one, Erdogan is still allied with the Turkish nationalists, and that means he really wants the autonomous Kurdish region in the north gone. So there have been some talks going on between the new leaders and the Syrian Kurds. And Erdogan is also holding his own talks with the PKK's imprisoned leader in Turkey. So that is number one. And Turkey also wants to make sure that it plays an important role in the reconstruction, because Turkish economy is, again, it's suffering, and Erdogan sees this post-Assad Syria as an economic opportunity for his allies in the construction sector. So he's eyeing a huge role. And for all of these to happen, the United States must withdraw from Syria, because Erdogan does not want to alienate President Trump.
All right, thank you. So you laid out very well the quid pro quo that Erdogan had with Assad. Is there a similar quid pro quo in the works? I think you've given some outlines of what that could look like, but what does success look like for Erdogan, and how does he navigate this tricky political terrain, given that Saudi and other countries are in the mix?
So Erdogan wants Americans gone. There are 2,000 American troops, because Americans are very close allies of the Syrian Kurdish militia. So, and that really strained bilateral relations a lot. So Erdogan now wants to open a new page with the Trump administration. And he's hoping that if Trump withdraws US troops, it will do two things for Erdogan. One, it will really mend ties with Washington, and he really wants to work closely with Trump. With Biden, he couldn't. I mean, he wanted to, but Biden was not really interested in engaging him. He wasn't invited to White House, and Erdogan was really desperate to get that invitation. He didn't. With Trump, he's hoping that things will be different. But to be able to sell that to Turkish public, Americans, they have to withdraw from Syria. So that's number one. And the number two thing, if Americans are gone, that will really leave the Syrian Kurdish militia, which is, again, part of PKK. That will leave the PKK in a weakened position at a time when Erdogan is negotiating with them. And he wants them in a weak position, because he wants to extract as many concessions as he can. And if the PKK thinks that it has Americans backing, they won't really grant those concessions. So that's why right now the perfect scenario is a scenario where Americans are not there, and the Syrian Kurdish militia is so weakened that it has agreed to integrate it, to lay down its arms, give up its autonomy project, and also a Syria where money is going in, Saudi money, European money, sanctions are lifted so that Turkish construction companies can make lots and lots of money. So that's the ideal scenario for Erdogan. And also, lastly, with those construction projects, he wants to send the millions of Syrian refugees back into Syria. I don't think it's realistic to send 4 million of them. People, I mean, they've been in Turkey for so many years. They've they have their families, so not everyone is gonna move back. But he can shift the narrative, right? He controls media, so even let's say 500,000 of them goes, he can easily say, well, the majority of Syrians are gone. They are now back to Syria, and that's going to be very important for him in the run-up to 2028 elections.
Thank you. And given this ideal scenario, what do you think is the most likely hurdle that Erdogan would face in achieving his utopia?
I think Kurds, Syrian Kurds, so before the uprising started there, Kurds did not even have citizenship rights. They didn't have ID cards. The Assad regime did not grant them any rights at all. Right? So that was before the uprising began. And after the uprising began, all of a sudden they had their autonomous region, their armed forces, and the area that they control, it has oil resources. So from there, not being citizens, to here, where they control large swaths of territory with incredible resources, right? So you cannot expect an armed group to agree to going back to zero, going back to pre-Arab uprising status. They're not going to accept that. So now the challenge is, we know that the new leaders in Syria said that we do not want federation, but the Kurds will want some kind of decentralization. That is really tricky to figure out. I mean, I don't know how they will. So I think that's one tricky part that could ruin Erdogan's plans domestically too. There needs to be an arrangement in Syria where the Syrian Kurds say, okay, we're laying down arms and we have agreed to an arrangement with Damascus where we won't have our autonomous region, but we will have some kind of, at least our local councils will be able to govern those small municipalities. So if they can reach to an agreement on that, that would be great, but it's very tricky. So that is number one challenge. Number two challenge is Israel is there, right? Israel's military presence in Syria is going to be very complicated. I'm not sure whether I know Trump wants to focus on things at home. And he said this to Israel. He said, I don't want trouble, get out of Lebanon. And he said he wanted quiet in Syria too. I don't know what that means. I don't know if it means he will allow Israelis to stay in Syria. Israelis are clear about that. They've said that they want to be there forever. So that is another challenge, given Israel and Turkey are not the best friends right now. So that will also pose another challenge for Erdogan and also Syria in general.
All right, great. And one brief follow-up to that. What leverage do the Syrian Kurds have right now in trying to obtain that middle ground that you spoke of?
It's American support basically, and Israelis also, although I don't think the Israeli defense minister said that, we cannot allow Turkey to kill Kurds, so we have to protect them. It's a strong narrative, but I don't think they can back it up with actual material or arms help. I don't think that's going to happen. So given that they don't have, the only thing that the Kurds can rely on is the presence of American troops there. Once they're gone, they're going to be extremely in a weak position.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Global Insights. You can subscribe to Global Insights on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your audio. For more analysis, events, and ways to connect with our community, click on the link in the description. See you next time.